We carry forward in a still minimally active 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. Although it seems the Earth is beginning to show signs that we may get an uptick in activity, and long-term models show some things that might be worth watching as we go into October. Plus, we have a clash of air masses back at home, influencing local weather as we make our way through the last weekend of summer. Hey there, my name is Eric. I'm an aspiring meteorologist, working my way towards my atmospheric science degree. Today is September 19th, 2025, and we're going to be analyzing the tropics at current conditions, as well as what weather in the US is going to look like over the next 3 days, as well as a little bit of what to expect temperature-wise going into October. Starting in the Atlantic, we have Tropical Storm Gabrielle, which honestly really does not look super impressive as it is currently. While it is forecast to become a Category 1 hurricane and pass probably a little too close to Bermuda for comfort, it is expected to mostly be a fish storm and probably just a concern for shipping routes as it makes its way north. People in Bermuda should keep an eye on this. Current tracks do show it likely staying east of Bermuda. However, uncertainty in track with where we are right now can still see to it that impacts change further down the line. So I do want to just go ahead and talk about the structure of this thing. It really, like I said, doesn't look very impressive, and even just a day ago it actually looked a lot worse. It has gotten a little bit better. This is the center of circulation here, and as you see, really there's not a lot of thunderstorm activity concentrated towards that center. Most of that is concentrated to the east, and even then it's mostly minimal thunderstorm activity happening here, just kind of popping up every other spot. Yesterday there was essentially no thunderstorm activity, and it was mostly just lower level wrap up. Honestly, at first glance you probably wouldn't even have assumed that it was a tropical storm, but because of how organized it became and because of the wind speed it was designated as such. You can see here on IR a little bit more of that thunderstorm activity a little bit more clearly. Like I said, center of circulation is out here and is expected to continue to make a north to northwestward track. Looking at the official track here, you can see that sort of too close for comfort thing I was talking about. It isn't expected to become a major hurricane. However, like I said, it will become a Category 1 hurricane according to the forecast, and it will make its closest approach to Bermuda going into Monday. And if we just take a little gander here at the ensemble, you could see most models do agree that it will stay east of Bermuda. Now, why is it that this is such a mediocre storm, I guess we could say, if we can even give it that much credit? Reasons being, as you can see, it's actually battling a lot of wind shear, especially the north and the west. Specifically, this is Gabrielle right here. And as we continue into the weekend, it makes its way northwest and then eventually north. And you can see there is some diffluence happening there, which allows the storm to breathe, but it still is surrounded by a lot of wind shear, which is going to keep it from being consistently stacked. But as I said, it does become a Category 1 hurricane according to forecast, and then it gets embedded in upper latitude dynamics and pretty much fizzles out from that point. Moisture content is also not really in its favor here either. As you can see throughout most of the early stages in its life, it's pretty much battling a lot of dry air on the western side. Kind of abdicates it a bit, but as it makes its way north, it pretty much gets surrounded again on the western side. Pretty much there's just a lot working against this thing from becoming much of a storm to talk about. So overall good for Bermuda to keep an eye on that, but it seems like we're going to be safe from direct impacts with this one. Now, what else do we have to talk about in the tropics? Well, we do have this tropical wave that just emerged off the coast of Africa. The National Weather Service is giving it a 20% chance of cyclone formation in the next 7 days. It's going to take for a bit a pretty similar path to Gabrielle, but there is something that I'm noticing longer term that leads me to believe that this might be a storm, if it does form, that heads further west and could potentially bring us impacts. However, what I'm observing is pretty far out, so just to keep that in mind is important. But I think this might end up being one of those sneaky storms. This is a nice and up-close personal view of the wave, and it's currently south of the Cabo Verde Islands. Although it does not look like much right now, this right here is evidence that it does have a good amount of fuel to work with, and it is developing into what could be a pretty good mass that might be able to survive the trek westward, even if we don't see an initial actual named storm show up. This is generally that wave right here. You can see it's, like I said, not organized. This is typically what these tropical waves look like, just kind of a congealed mess of these patches of thunderstorms that eventually develop, in some cases, a low pressure system, which then further feeds into a storm that potentially develops. According to the National Weather Service, the center of the wave is actually situated apparently right here, although a wave is usually not designated as much as an organized system, so this has having influence generally over this entire area here, as you can see. So out ahead of where they consider the center to be, about right here, it's creating these thunderstorms. You see, I'm just creating such a lovely illustration here of just squiggles, to just ADHD manifesting on the screen. Looking ahead with the system, I do want to start off by looking at the moisture content run, and the reason why is because it's kind of illustrates kind of what I'm noticing here long term. But I'm going to go ahead and draw you an area just so it's easier to follow along with what I'm talking about here. So we have the tropical wave here right now. This is present conditions, and I'm noticing that going into next week, and then even long term into October, while those hours are a lot less reliable to consider with how far the model goes, with what I am seeing, I feel like this is worth considering, and you'll see why in just a minute. So that is expected to continue in a general track like this, west and northwest. Now, as I play this run, I want you to keep an eye on this area and what continues to move generally westward in this highlighted area that I have right here, because this could either be resulting from something separate from that tropical wave that we're currently seeing, or it could be absorbing that tropical wave later on down the line, or it could be something just completely different. But I will show you here, and of course, because of the way my software works, it's not going to keep the highlighted thing on screen. But if you kind of remember exactly where that was, you can see that wave moving further west. I don't know, it's sort of weird. You got that wave moving off the coast of Africa right there, just south of the Cabo Verde, and then I guess it looks like it's something else that's further ahead of it that looks like its own moisture pocket, and once it makes its way east of the Bahamas, it forms a low pressure system, and then that moves over the Bahamas, over north of Cuba, and then into the Gulf as what would be, in this case, a fairly strong hurricane. That's this moisture pocket here you see with that low pressure system. Now, as I said, this is pretty far out. This is hour 360 on the Euro model, and this would be Saturday, October 4th. So generally, it could be a waste of time to already be talking about this, but given that it's the Euro model and it tends to be more reliable further out than something like the GFS, this is worth considering, and really that's not even the reason why. If you look at the GFS, you see Gabrielle passing through, and then after that, the GFS throws a low pressure system that forms in that same area just east of the Bahamas. So that means that both these models are agreeing on this initial low pressure system. However, the GFS takes it and embeds it into a frontal boundary that moves out of the US, and then it takes it off to the northeast, and it doesn't do what the Euro model says it's going to do, which is enter the Gulf and become a hurricane. But just the fact that both of these models agree that something is going to show up there at that time, even that far out, says that it's worth considering, because a lot of the time you'll get these models kind of biased towards one thing, but you don't see the other model reciprocate it. If both agree, it kind of becomes a little bit more convincing. Now, the odds of it playing out exactly that way, especially with the way the Euro model showed you, this just like fairly strong hurricane, and I gotta actually go to the next run. Now, the odds of it playing out exactly like that, just as the Euro model here is showing, where that hurricane enters the Gulf in that specific spot at that specific intensity, is not likely. But this points to a pattern that we should lead us to keep an eye on that region when the time comes. So not a reason to panic, but I think just because of the alignment of those models, I think that it's worth taking into consideration, as well as the fact that going into October, this region really starts becoming conducive for cyclones. Another thing is, it looks like the Saharan air layer is laying off a little bit. Before, the Bermuda High was pumping out so much of that directly from Africa that it was just choking out any storms, and I talked about that in my previous video. Now, with this being the forecast, we don't know for certain this is exactly how it's going to play out, but that potential system does manage to get away from all of that. As you can see, I mean, it's further out west, and most of that is situated over here in the east. And even then, it's kind of not as bad as it's looked the past few weeks. So, with less dry Saharan air and dust moving in, that leads to the potential of more storm formations. You can actually see just generally throughout this whole play that the Bermuda High actually becomes pretty weak, which allows Gabrielle to make that turn back out going east as it gets pulled by the westerlies. And it kind of starts to make the Saharan air layer a little lazy, because it actually does remain really weak, relatively really weak. And that is before what probably is still currently, actually not even currently, but has been flushing out that dry Saharan air into the development region. But currently it's kind of taking a break. We will go ahead and get a look at the surface pressure and precipitation run, and you can see Gabrielle moving on, and then that system forming, going over the Bahamas. And if it does play out in that way, it will become a pretty good threat to the Bahamas and Cuba, as well as the Florida Keys, but again, not likely to play out exactly that way with how far out it is. And then also, as you can see, that region where I suspect that system to form does have some diffluence, and it is actually clear of wind shear, and a lot of the westerlies and the wind shear stay further north, as those shortwaves stay more over the states, and the jet stream stays suspended north more, and that allows for a pattern where that storm is potentially able to form, and that gets drawn in to the Gulf, and generally doesn't have its forecast not to have any wind shear stopping it. So also there is just generally a lot less wind shear in the main development region at that time too, so you could maybe expect something out of that. Also, even in the Caribbean, where the Central American gyre would probably spit something out. Kind of adds on to what I said in my previous video. Just keep an eye on the Caribbean and the Gulf going forward, just because it starts getting more active as we go into October. But still, surprisingly, that is all that we have for the tropics right now, even with it being just past the we're pretty much still in the peak of hurricane season, but we're past the very, very peak of it. It is still weird, this lull of activity, but there are explanations for it. But I will continue to update that as time goes on. We're going to go ahead and take a dive into the weather back at home and see what that looks like for us over the next 3 days, as well as a few temperature trends going into the rest of September. All right, here we are in the good old US of A. So currently, right off the bat, we'll go ahead and get started with talking about the high pressure that is dominating much of the deep south as well as the east. This is preventing really much of any activity in this region. It is also bringing some pretty summer-like weather even as we start going into fall, which is actually going to start in just 1, 2, 3 days. I think it's the 21st of September or the 22nd. It's when the equinox is. Now, as with usual high-pressure systems in the northern hemisphere, this creates a anticyclonic rotation of air. This is also sinking, suppressing air, so all the air around it doesn't lift to create storms. However, any moisture that's being delivered by this does make its way up into the plains, which is where you have this colder air mass and this cold front that is making its way southeast. That is what is currently creating some thunderstorms here through the Great Plains, going into, you got a lot actually over in Kansas and Oklahoma, going into Missouri and Arkansas, but nothing too crazy. Remnant moisture from Tropical Storm Mario from the Pacific actually moved into SoCal yesterday and brought some considerable rain. And what's left from that is that low pressure system you can see there, and that is probably what is bringing in moisture and some local scattered thunderstorms into the southwest. Furthermore, the high pressure systems that I was talking about are also helping to fuel some scattered rainstorms here in the northeast as it interacts a little bit with this here frontal boundary. I have an occluded front here in the Midwest, but there are still some rain showers there. And even in California, like in the Silicon Valley, we do have actually a small spot of heavy rain and potentially still some flash flooding, and that's actually part of what's left from Tropical Storm Mario. Going further into the weekend, an upper-level trough that is expected to move through the plains/Midwest is going to drive some rainstorms from the Great Plains into the Midwest and even Northeast. Alongside that, several intermittent shortwave troughs that make their way into the Southwest and then the South will probably continue to bring some showers and thunderstorms. Going from this weekend even into September 24th, this trough here is what's actually going to bring a continued bit cooler weather in the Four Corners area as well as some of the plains and even in California. Meanwhile, the rest of the U.S., like the deep south and the east, are experiencing summer-like weather, and they probably will continue to experience that going into October, just looking at trends. Climate Outlook shows that the next 2 weeks is going to be above average, while likely near normal to potentially below normal in the plains area. Now, looking at the Outlook map for Saturday morning to Sunday morning, you can see that sagging cold front here and the northeast will interact with that high pressure system to probably bring some scattered thunderstorms into the Ohio Valley and the northeast. You're also still going to see some rainstorms proceeding eastward here in the plains as you go into Saturday and into Sunday. Going from Sunday into Monday morning, that occluded front actually overtakes that cold air mass and a warm front pushes forward. This will probably actually produce some local rainstorms throughout the Midwest and the plains still. That front in the east does move further southwest and probably allows for actually some thunderstorms over western North Carolina, like in the tallest of the Appalachians, where that high pressure system is. It starts to interact with that front, which is drawing in air like this. Florida and some of the East Coast may even see some scattered thunderstorms as it interacts with a dry line. And way off in the west, a Pacific system that actually moves in along, I think it's one of those classic northwest low pressure systems that interact with the jet stream. And as you can see, that's actually probably going to bring some of the, potentially some of the first snow, most likely just mixed precipitation to Washington, which is actually pretty interesting, as well as some of the Rockies here in Wyoming and Colorado. Looking at minimum temperatures for Saturday, which is going to be tomorrow, you can see the interior Northeast is actually going to see some really cool temps. You're going to have areas in the 40s and even 30s, so some areas might actually have some frost advisories, especially up in Maine and even the Great Lakes region. Even places up in higher elevation around the Rockies and Utah probably can see some actually relatively nicer temperatures. While everywhere else, especially in the east and the deep south, you're kind of just seeing typical, nothing really big to talk about in terms of temperature. Today on Friday, we actually have the greatest high temperature, or actually the greatest minimum temperature is going to be, it looks like in Galveston, or just off the shore of Galveston, at 83 degrees Fahrenheit. That's actually pretty warm for a minimum temperature. Even here in Southeast Texas, usually get into the lower 70s at night if we don't have some cold air mass coming through. You see, going into Sunday, this generally tracks going forward. And then going into deviating a little bit more past just the 3-day outlook, there is one of those shortwave troughs that will make their way through, going from the west into the Great Plains, which is going to allow for actually some cooler temperatures. So as we continue into the latter part of September, it seems like this and probably areas even in California are going to be the only places experiencing relatively cooler weather, which is especially for California, that's pretty unusual, but that's kind of has a lot to do with the cloud cover that they're experiencing. And then looking at maximum temperatures, you can see that trend is sustained. So this is the hottest that it will get on these given days. So this is for today. This is Saturday. You can see California is looking like it's colder than usual, while the east and the south stay pretty warm, and the interior northeast stays cool. And then going into the 22nd to the 24th, you have that shortwave trough that cools off the plains in California even more. So unfortunately for most of us, especially in the more populated parts of the U.S., we're going to still be seeing some pretty average weather for this time of the year, maybe some still summer-like weather, but hopefully October will bring a change. Ambitiously looking further ahead as we go into October, there actually is cold air descend further into the southwest and into parts of the deep south like Texas, but this is pretty far out, and I think that it would be a little ambitious to say that we're going to probably see things cool down beginning of October. We're probably going to have to look into later parts of October to probably start expecting more fall-like weather like we had just the other week with that big trough that came in, which sucks. I hate to see that. I really do want to see some fall weather myself. I think everyone's pretty much ready for that to consistently come on, but Mother Nature is not always going to be so lenient about that, as you're going to have the battle of the different air masses as the season changes. Okay, now the GFS actually shows a trough moving in and upper level low in the northeast on October 2nd. So maybe this is a trend that we could look towards, but again, since this is the GFS and it's so far out, I don't really expect that to happen. So again, I would just start looking more towards like mid-October for cooler temperatures at this point. So to sum it up, Gabrielle is not a threat to land most likely. However, Bermuda should continue to keep an eye on it. We will continue to monitor the tropics, especially in the Caribbean and the Gulf as we go later into the month and into October. As I said, a high-pressure ridge is going to keep most of the eastern and southern United States pretty hot. Save it. The northeast, the extreme interior northeast, where they are seeing some cooler temperatures behind that frontal boundary, as well as over in California and the west, where there is more cloud cover from what's left of Mario, as well as probably more tropical activity that we'll see in the Pacific that will continue to influence that. So we do have lots of moving parts here, and again, we just continue to just teeter on this sort of fence about whether we're going to start seeing some activity. I mean, everywhere it's just been so quiet and kind of just on the fence. This is kind of typical locally for things to be a bit more calm as we go into fall, but usually it's a bit more like in August you start seeing less thunderstorm activity, less severe weather, and more drought-like conditions if that ever were to occur. I think in Ohio there are currently some drought-like conditions. Actually can consider a lot of us here in the U.S. lucky that we're not seeing drought conditions, although don't quote me on that because I haven't actually looked into details of drought conditions. But I think that we're mostly doing fine compared to especially the past few years. I know in 2022 and 2023 we had some pretty bad droughts, especially here in Texas. We had like some of the worst conditions since 2011. We had the really bad drought and the fire over in Magnolia. But the tropics are really what's so strange right now because we should be seeing more activity. But like I said, it's a lot of it is just because of this factor here. You can actually see it on satellite. I think a lot of that actually is Saharan and dust, and it's swirling around the area where our current wave actually is. That's all whoops. Even someone who doesn't normally study the atmosphere can kind of look at that and be like, oh, there's something going on there. That looks like the desert is trying to become part of the atmosphere. So it's actually kind of amazing how much of that you can see, but most of it is still concentrated to just off the coast of Africa, and it's kind of abdicated from the rest of the Atlantic. So that's one reason why to just keep an eye out on the two systems we're watching going forward. And that's what I have for today. In about 3 days, I will make another update on everything. Something I want to note for the people who have been recently subscribing, I'll probably have some other content other than weather posted soon, namely some gaming content. I just want you to keep in mind that's not a reason to deviate. Weather is still going to be the main focus of this channel. That is just one of my other forms of content on here, and I don't really intend on making separate channels for that because there's not really any point. So if you see that, don't be alarmed, don't be dissuaded. Just I'll actually, a lot of the time, if I upload a gaming video, I'll try to get a weather video uploaded alongside that. And I do have storm chasing content, some of my first storm chasing content going back as far as Barrel that I still have not gotten uploaded. That's kind of where my storm chasing started, so that will be uploaded soon. Just to give you an idea, at least I know it'll be up before the end of the year. I'm just very particular about I kind of turn those into masterpieces. I spend a lot of time on them, so I just want them to be, I'm a perfectionist with them, essentially. It's kind of an art for me, so. But you can look forward to some actual in the field weather content here coming up soon. And if we actually do get hurricane impacts to the US before the season ends, you can expect a documentation from that from me as well. So wrapping it up, that's everything for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, I'd appreciate if you can like the video, subscribe so you can stay up to date, and yeah, take care, stay safe out there. I'll see you next time. You are the storm.